What's going on, family? I'm Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. I'm going to continue to examine 100 years of the greatest 150 black fighters of all times. Now, the man we're looking at here is Wallace Bud Smith. He became lightweight champion of the world when he would defeat Jimmy Carter and take his lightweight championship strap. Now, I can't add Wallace Bud Smith on this list of 100 years of the greatest 150 black fighters because he was inconsistent. And he misses out on the criteria of consistency. He was inconsistent in his run as a lightweight champion. So the list is too small. I can't make exceptions for certain fighters because it would throw off the list that I did provide. Now, Curtis and I put this list together, Curtis Anderson. And we were very strategic. We were very careful. We chopped away a lot of fighters because they missed out on their consistency. That seemed to be the part of the criteria where a lot of these fighters fell short. And if we were judging fighters today, they wouldn't even make the list because they're not consistent. Now, there's a few fighters that will be on this list that are fighting today. And we'll get to that point when we get there. But consistency is very important to Curtis and I. We had to make sure that we chose fighters that were consistent in their careers, especially if they won titles. So Wallace Bud Smith, he was born April 2nd, 1929 in Cincinnati, Ohio. He stood 5 foot 6.5 inches. And he won a 1948 AAU lightweight championship competition. He would have 70 bouts and he would win 65 of those bouts. Started out as a professional with a strong amateur background. And he was very consistent as an amateur, as you can see. He would win the AAU lightweight championship division. So he would turn professional November 29th, 1948. And he would start out pretty good with a first round knockout. And then he would have a second round knockout in his next fight, January 24th, 1948. And he would have his first year of fights in Cincinnati, in his hometown. But then in 1950, he would lose one fight to James Carty, which is fine. And he was consistent. He would win one and he would have a knockout and then a draw. But in 1951, March 6th to be exact, he would knock out a man in 2 rounds by the name of Frankie Betts, fought him in Cincinnati. And the first time he stepped out of Cincinnati, he went to St. Louis. April 4th, 1951, he would lose to Virgil Akins in 10 rounds. And Virgil Akins, as I said to you once before, was a very good fighter. I'll be talking about Virgil Akins as well. He was a part of a tournament, and we'll get to that when we get to that. But Virgil Akins was a very, very good fighter. So that was a very good win for Wallace Bud Smith. And mind you, 1951 was an upsetting year for most of the top fighters who had title shots because they would all lose their belts, every last one of them, in 1951. So 1952, January 21st, Wallace Bud Smith would take on Teddy Red Top Davis, fought him in New York, and he would defeat him in 8 rounds. May 16th, 1952, he would take on Frank Flannery in Melbourne, Australia, and he would come away with a win in 8 rounds. But June 6th and August 18th, he would take on George Barnes, fought him in Melbourne and fought him in Sydney, in Australia, and he would lose to him twice, back to back, in 12 rounds. But then he would take on fighters such as Johnny Saxton, March 10th, 1953. He would wind up getting a 10-round draw in Miami Beach, Florida. But March 23rd, 1953, he would take on Orlando Zulueta from Cuba. Fought him in Brooklyn. He would lose to him in 10 rounds. He would get a rematch May 5th, 1953 with Orlando Zulueta. Fought him in Cincinnati in his hometown. But this time he would come away with the victory in 10 rounds. And then he would face Luther Rawlings, May 19th, 1953. Fought him in Miami Beach. And that would be a 10-round draw. And he would face Johnny Williams. Now, Johnny Williams, if you don't know, is a crowd pleaser. Very, very good fighter. And he can beat you at any given night. Doesn't matter whether you were a champion or you were a top contender. He was a very good fighter, was Johnny Williams. And then he would face Arthur King in Brooklyn. Fought him September 14th, 1953. And he would knock out Arthur King in 5 rounds. He would take on Orlando Zulueta once again, December 11th, 1953 in New York, and he would defeat him in 10 rounds. So he did very well in 1953. 1954, February 20th, he would take on Joe Maselli in Cincinnati, in his hometown, and he'd be stopped in 5 rounds by Joe Maselli. May 1st, 1954, he would take on Johnny Gonzalez. Johnny Gonzalez was a very, very good fighter. He fought him in Cincinnati in his hometown, and he would lose in 10 rounds in his hometown with Johnny Gonzalez. So there were moments like this with Wallace Bud Smith. Although, like I said, a very, very good fighter, but he was not consistent. And to prove my point, he would take on Arthur Pursley. November 20th, Arthur Pursley was a very good fighter. Fought him in Miami, Florida. He knocked him out 9 rounds. But January 8th, 1955, he would take on Johnny Gonzalez once again in Miami, Florida. He would have a 10-round draw. Then June 29th, 1955, he would defeat Jimmy Carter in Boston, Massachusetts. And he would win the lightweight championship belt. Now, he would take on Jimmy Carter once again in a return go. October 19th, 1955, and he would defeat him in 15 rounds. So he would keep his crown with Jimmy Carter. Now, at that time, Jimmy Carter started slipping a little bit. I'm not taking any credit away from Wallace Bud Smith. But he defeated him twice in a row. But he would lose to certain fighters such as Larry Boardman. Larry Boardman was a decent fighter. There was no quality of a fighter like Jimmy Carter. And he would lose his title August 24th, 1956 to Old Bones Joe Brown, New Orleans. And Joe Brown would have to wait 15 years before he would get that title shot. And it happened to be with Wallace Bud Smith. So I can't place him. I mean, he was knocked out by Joe Brown February 13th, 1957 in Miami Beach in a return go in 11 rounds. And Wallace Bud Smith was a champion when he faced Joe Brown the first time. Joe Brown would defend his title 12 title defense, So he was an outstanding fighter. But Wallace Bud Smith, great fighter, devastating fighter. He would win today. He would be a champion today. But the purpose of this list is to be consistent, and that's what we're looking for. So Wallace Bud Smith does not make the cut for this list. And those who are Wallace Bud Smith's fans and family members understand that Scrapbook Boxing sincerely has the highest regard for Wallace Bud Smith. And I wish he could be on this list. But because it's such a short list of 150 greatest black fighters, I can't place him because of his inconsistency. It had nothing to do with him. It's just the way it is. So shout out to Wallace Bud Smith. And perhaps on another list, he'll make a cut based on the criteria. Thanks for listening. Now we're looking at Don Jordon. Don Jordon was the welterweight champion of the world when he would defeat Virgil Akins for the vacant welterweight championship strap that was left over by Carmen Basilio. Carmen Basilio would vacate that strap because he wanted to move up to the middleweight division and take on the great Sugar Ray Robinson. Now, Don Jordon, I'm not going to put on this list as well. Don Jordon was a phenomenal fighter, but once again, he didn't meet the criteria of consistency. As a matter of fact, he's very fortunate to even be in the tournament because he was not consistent. Now, in that tournament, you had fighters that came out of the woodworks. Fighters such as Vince Martinez and Rory Calhoun. You had Don Jordon and Benny Kid Paret, as well as Virgil Akins and others. So Virgil Akins would take care of Vince Martinez, and Don Jordon would take care of Benny Kid Paret. And Don Jordon would wind up taking on Virgil Akins, and he would defeat Virgil Akins. So then he would become the welterweight champion of the world. So what's interesting about Don Jordon, like I said, he was not consistent. He was a very good fighter. But he wasn't as consistent as you would want in a champion to be on a list like this, because it's not a long list. You have 150 greatest black fighters within a 100-year span, and he's not going to make the cut that way because of his inconsistency. But like I said, he was a very good fighter, and I wanted to recognize some of the fighters. So I recognized Wallace Bud Smith, and I'm now recognizing Don Jordon for his accomplishments, and I think that's fair. Now, perhaps in another video or another poll that we take, he may make the cut, but not in this particular video. So, or fight series, I should say. So, shout out to Don Jordon. I want to see him in another video because I believe he is a great fighter. But let's talk about him a little bit. He was born June 22nd, 1934. He stood 5'9". And he was a lightweight out of California. He would turn welterweight. And he would become the welterweight champion of the world, as we discussed. Now, he began his career April 27th, 1953. And he would win in 4 rounds against Ray Sumner. And he would continue to win until his first loss. His first loss was March 20th, 1954. He would lose in 10 rounds to Andy Escobar. And then he would knock out Manuel Montour, and then he would lose again. So he was becoming inconsistent early in his career. But then he got a couple of knockouts. He did very well. He would win the California welterweight title against Art Romington, and would defeat him in 12 rounds, October 4th, 1953. It's interesting because October 4th, 1940 was when Ray Robinson would turn professional. He was on the undercard of Fitzy Zivit and Henry Armstrong. But Don Jordon would then lose to Art Aragon, December 15th, 1955. Lost to him in Los Angeles in his hometown, 10 rounds. He would take on Paddy DeMarco, February 2nd, 1956, and he would knock him out in 5 rounds, Los Angeles. That was impressive because Paddy DeMarco would become the lightweight champion of the world when he would defeat Jimmy Carter. So Don Jordon had some very good wins. He just, as I said, was not consistent. He lost to Orlando Zulueta, very good Cuban fighter. And he would be in a ring with Archie Whitewater, Los Angeles. Archie Whitewater was an Indian fighter. And he fought mostly out of the West Coast. You would find him most of the time at the Olympic Auditorium. And he was a very good crowd pleaser. But he was never in the top 10. So, although that was a decent victory, but it wasn't strong enough for me to see how he would make it to that tournament. But like I said, Don Jordon was a very, very good fighter. He was just not consistent, and we're being very strict on this list of 150 greatest black fighters of all times. Now, he would finally win the welterweight championship strap, December 5th of 1958, when he would defeat Virgil Akins in Los Angeles. And he would be the champion, and that was a very good victory for him. And he showed it wasn't a fluke because he would face Virgil Akins once again, April 24th, 1959. And this time he would face him in St. Louis, Missouri. And he would defeat him in 15 rounds. So that was a very good victory for Don Jordon. July 10th, 1959, he would take on Denny Moyer in Portland, Oregon. He would defeat him in 15 rounds. Then he would face Francisco Thompson. They would call him Frederico Thompson. And what was interesting about him, he would be in a very good fight with Benny Kid Paret. Now, he would knock out Don Jordon in 4 rounds, December 12th, 1959. And that's my point. Don Jordon just was not consistent. He was a very good fighter. He would wind up having a total bout career of 75 fights. He would have 17 knockouts, 1 draw. He would lose 20 fights by decision. He would have 1 no decision on his record. And I got to give him his props because he found a way to make it in that tournament and he won the tournament. But he'd be knocked out as champion by Frederico Thompson. Title just wasn't on the line. And when you look at these kind of things, he would lose it to Benny Kid Paret May 27th, 1960. And that's how Benny Kid Paret became champion. And Benny Kid Paret would lose his title to Emil Griffith. And Emil Griffith would get it back. But the thing about it is, Don Jordon just wasn't as consistent as we would like for him to be on a list like this. So I just wanted to recognize Don Jordon. He was a very good fighter. I have a lot of write-ups on him. My dad knew of him. And I wanted to shout him out because he deserves it. He was a very, very good fighter. Phenomenal fighter. You know, you can look at it that way because he won the championship. But it just doesn't fit the cut. And the criteria is consistency. And that's where he falls short. So shout out to Don Jordon. Now, I want to take a look at Virgil Akins for one moment. Now, Virgil Akins, I'm going to put on this list of the greatest 100 years of great 150 black fighters of all time. And the reason why I'm putting him on this list is because he was consistent. Now, he would lose to fighters such as Joe Maselli and Johnny Saxton. We lose to Andy Brown. Some of these fighters were headliners in places such as Eastern Parkway Arena, Broadway Arena. But then when you look at guys like Joe Maselli and Johnny Saxton, these guys were in the top 5. And so when you look at losses like that, you have to take under consideration at what point and when did he fight these guys? Early in his career, did he improve? Did he become more consistent with his victories as he improved in his career? How did he wind up in the tournament to begin with? So you have to look at those little nuances and details when you're going to place him over someone else that you didn't place. Now, although, and the next question would probably be, well, why did Don Jordon get in when he defeated Virgil Akins? And Virgil Akins got in because Virgil Akins was more consistent. He just happened to lose to Don Jordon. So Virgil Akins was a little more consistent in his career than Don Jordon happened to be. And so that's why we have to be very careful with how we place these fighters. But in all fairness, I did make Don Jordon an honorary mention. I did want to take a look at his career as I did Wallace Bud Smith. Because Wallace Bud Smith did defeat Jimmy Carter. He would lose to Joe Brown. But how he was losing up until that point is why he wasn't added to 150 greatest black fighters of all time. So, Scrapbook Boxing Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series, on behalf of Curtis Anderson and myself, I want to thank you for watching this video. Virgil Akins has been added to the list. Don Jordon came up short. Wallace Bud Smith came up short. And in some other list or video, they will make the cut based on the criteria. So take care and watch out for the next video. 100 years, the greatest 150 greatest black fighters of all times.